You didn't stop feeling because you wanted to. You stopped because feeling cost too much. There was a moment, maybe many moments, where your nervous system made a quiet decision on your behalf. Not a conscious one, not a dramatic one, just a subtle internal shift that said, "This is too much, I can't keep letting this in." So you learned to pull back. You learned how to go quiet inside while still functioning on the outside. How to smile without opening. How to listen without absorbing. How to be present without being touched. Disconnection didn't arrive as a flaw. It arrived as relief. Relief from the chaos of other people's emotions. Relief from the sting of unmet needs. Relief from the sharp edge of hope that keeps getting disappointed. At first, it felt like control. You could finally breathe again. No more emotional whiplash. No more waiting for the floor to drop out from under you. No more caring more than the people who were supposed to care back. So you did what any intelligent, sensitive system would do under repeated emotional threat. You adapted. You built distance where closeness once burned. You replaced longing with logic. You replaced vulnerability with self-sufficiency. You replaced "I need" with "I'm fine." And for a while it worked. You became the calm one. The independent one. The one who doesn't need much. The one who doesn't ask. The one who doesn't fall apart. People may even admire you for it. But here's the paradox no one warns you about. The same emotional disconnection that once protected you from pain slowly begins to disconnect you from life itself. Because numbness doesn't know how to selectively shut down. It doesn't only mute grief. It dulls joy. It doesn't only block heartbreak. It blocks intimacy. It doesn't only shield you from abandonment. It keeps you from being fully met. And somewhere along the way, without realizing it, you stop asking yourself a dangerous question. What do I actually feel right now? Instead, you ask safer ones. What's the point? Why bother? How do I get through this without needing anyone? You become skilled at existing in a narrow emotional range, functional, controlled, composed. But beneath that calm surface, something quieter starts to ache. A low-grade loneliness. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just persistent. You can be surrounded by people and still feel strangely untouched. You can be in a relationship and still feel alone inside it. You can succeed, progress, achieve, and feel an unsettling emptiness when the noise dies down. Because the part of you that learned to disconnect didn't just disconnect from pain. It disconnected from dependence, from receiving, from the dangerous hope that someone might actually stay, attune, or care deeply. So now you live in a careful middle ground. Not devastated, but not deeply alive either. In the hardest part, you may not even recognize this as suffering. You tell yourself this is maturity, or strength, or realism. You tell yourself this is just how I am. But it's not who you are. It's what you learned to do when feeling became unsafe. And here's the quiet truth most people never name. Emotional disconnection is not the absence of pain. It is the postponement of it. Because what you don't feel doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in your body, in your relationships, in the moments where you want to reach out but don't, in the words you swallow, in the needs you minimize, in the closeness you almost allow and then subtly pull away from. And if any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, the quiet distance, the emotional self-containment, the way you've learned to survive by not needing. You're not broken. You're adapted. And this space exists for people like you. People who feel deeply, think endlessly, and learned early that silence felt safer than expression. If these words are touching something inside you, consider staying here. Subscribing isn't about content, it's about not navigating these inner landscapes alone. And if you're able, leave a comment, even a sentence. Sometimes naming the weight is the first time it loosens. To understand why some people disconnect to avoid pain, we have to move beneath personality and into pattern. Because emotional disconnection is not a trait. It's not introversion. It's not emotional intelligence. And it's not detachment in the philosophical sense. It is a nervous system strategy. One that formed when emotional closeness became unpredictable, overwhelming, or unsafe. Let's name what's actually happening. At its core, disconnection is a freeze-adapted response. When fight doesn't work and flight isn't possible, the nervous system does something more subtle. It reduces sensation. This is where emotional numbing begins. The brain learns that intensity equals danger. So it turns the volume down. Not because you're weak, but because your system is intelligent. Over time, this becomes a default setting. You stop fully registering emotional highs and lows. You become hyperregulated on the surface, calm, rational, contained. While internally, your body remains on low-grade alert. This is why people who disconnect often feel fine but exhausted. Why rest doesn't always feel restorative. Why stillness can feel strangely uncomfortable. The body never learned that connection is safe. Only that disconnection prevents collapse. Many people who disconnect grew up with inconsistent emotional attunement. Not always abuse. Not always neglect in obvious ways. Sometimes it was care that came and went. Love that felt conditional. Emotional availability that depended on mood, stress, or performance. So the child learned something crucial. Needing too much risks disappointment. Feeling too deeply risks rejection. This creates what psychology often refers to as avoidant or disorganized attachment. Not a label to trap you, but a map to understand you. You learn to self-soothe by self-containment, to regulate by not reaching, to survive by lowering expectations. And eventually, this strategy fused with identity. You didn't just do independence. You became the independent one. When emotional expression felt unsafe, thinking took its place. Analysis replaced feeling. Observation replaced participation. Understanding replaced vulnerability. You learned to live in your mind because your body held too much unprocessed emotion. This is why people who disconnect often overthink instead of feel, intellectualize pain instead of expressing it, seek clarity while avoiding closeness. It's not emotional intelligence. It's emotional displacement. The mind stepped in to do what the environment couldn't. Create order where attunement was missing. How childhood becomes adult identity. Here is where it becomes invisible. What began as survival slowly solidified into self-concept. I'm low maintenance. I don't need much. I'm better on my own. I don't get attached. But these aren't neutral descriptions. They are adaptive conclusions drawn by a younger nervous system trying to stay safe. The adult you became is still protecting the child who learned that connection had a cost. And until this is seen clearly, disconnection feels like choice, when it is actually conditioning. Not a flaw, not a failure, a pattern that made sense when it formed, and quietly asks to be re-examined now. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with emotional disconnection. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't collapse you to the floor. It lives in the background. A muted ache that follows you through otherwise functional days. A sense that something essential is missing but unnamed. A feeling of being slightly removed from your own life. This is the grief of self-abandonment that no one ever taught you to recognize. Because when you disconnect to avoid pain, you don't just lose the sharp edges of suffering. You lose depth. You lose the experience of being fully seen, of being impacted, of allowing someone to matter enough to leave a mark. And the tragedy is this. The more you avoid pain, the more you unknowingly avoid meaning. Disconnection demands sacrifice. The emotional sacrifices no one sees. You sacrifice spontaneity because control feels safer than surprise. You sacrifice longing because wanting exposes you. You sacrifice softness because softness once went unanswered. You tell yourself you're being realistic. But realism, when shaped by early disappointment, slowly becomes emotional minimalism. You begin to live life at arm's length. Not because you don't want closeness, but because closeness once asked too much and gave too little in return. So you develop core fears that rarely reach language. If I open, I'll be disappointed again. If I need, I'll feel foolish. If I hope, I'll be left holding it alone. And so you stop hoping loudly. You learn to want quietly or not at all. The existential cost, a life half inhabited. Philosophically, this pattern echoes a question that has haunted thinkers for centuries. Is it better to feel less in order to suffer less, or to feel fully and risk everything? The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard spoke of despair not as sadness, but as a misalignment with the self. Not being who you truly are, but being who you learn to be to survive. From that lens, emotional disconnection is not peace. It is a quiet form of despair. Because you are present but not fully participating. Alive but cautiously. Here but guarded. You may move through relationships without truly entering them. You may love without letting it change you. You may choose safety over aliveness again and again without consciously deciding to. And over time, something subtle happens. You stop trusting that life can meet you. Not because life can't, but because you never stay open long enough to find out. The loneliness beneath self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency becomes your armor. But armor by design blocks both injury and touch. So while you may pride yourself on not needing others, there's often a quiet hunger underneath that pride. Not for dependency, but for mutuality. For someone to notice you without being asked. For someone to stay emotionally present without you having to perform. For connection that doesn't feel like a negotiation. And the most painful part, you may believe this kind of connection is for other people. More expressive people. Less guarded people. People who didn't learn so early that closeness had a cost. So you grieve silently. Not for something you had, but for something you never allowed yourself to fully want. And that grief, when unacknowledged, doesn't disappear. It settles into the background of your life. A sense of almost close, almost fulfilled, almost known. By the time emotional disconnection reaches adulthood, it rarely looks like trauma. It looks like functionality, like maturity, like independence, like being easygoing or low drama. But when you look closely, you begin to see the pattern repeating. Not as a personality, but as a protective system still doing its job. Let's name how this strategy shows up across your life. Not to judge it, but to witness it. 1. Relationships, intimacy with an exit plan. You may crave closeness, but only to a certain depth. You share selectively. You reveal carefully. You keep an internal door unlocked, just in case you need to leave emotionally before someone leaves you. You might pull away when someone gets too close. Lose interest once intimacy becomes real. Feel safer being the one who needs less. This isn't emotional unavailability. It's preemptive self-protection. Your system learned that attachment equals vulnerability. And vulnerability once came with consequences. 2. Career, self-reliance as identity. In work, disconnection often becomes productivity. You may overfunction to avoid asking for help. Tie your worth to competence rather than connection. Feel safest when you're needed, not when you're supported. Achievement becomes a way to stay regulated. Because being valued for what you do feels safer than being valued for who you are. 3. Boundaries, distance disguised as strength. You likely have strong boundaries, but they may be built more on avoidance than clarity. You cut off quickly. You detach instead of repair. You choose solitude over emotional negotiation. Boundaries become walls when the nervous system doesn't trust resolution. 4. Inner dialogue, emotional minimization. Inside, your voice is often firm but dismissive. It's not that big of a deal. I'm fine. I don't need to feel this. You downplay your own pain before anyone else can. This isn't resilience. It's self-abandonment dressed as composure. 5. Emotional processing, delay not absence. You don't explode emotionally. You store. Feelings get postponed. Grief gets intellectualized. Anger gets converted into numbness or fatigue. And later, when the body can't hold it anymore, it leaks out in quieter ways. Chronic exhaustion. Sudden withdrawal. Emotional flatness. 6. Self-image, this is just who I am. Perhaps the most powerful manifestation is identification. You stop seeing disconnection as something you learned. and start seeing it as who you are. I'm just not emotional. I work better alone. I don't get attached. But these are not truths. They are adaptations frozen in time. Unlearning begins with witnessing. Healing doesn't begin by forcing yourself to feel more. It begins by not gaslighting your coping. By saying, "This protected me. This made sense. This kept me functioning when other options weren't available." Witnessing turns judgment into compassion. And compassion creates safety. Safety is what allows patterns to loosen, without being ripped away. You don't dismantle armor by shaming it. You dismantle it by understanding why it was built. Healing emotional disconnection is not about becoming exposed, expressive, or emotionally intense. It's about becoming safe to yourself. Because the part of you that learned to disconnect did so under conditions where safety was absent. And it will not release control until it feels something different in the body, not just the mind. So healing begins gently. The inner child in disconnection is not crying loudly. They are quiet, self-contained, watching carefully. They learned early that needing too much wasn't met. So they stopped asking. Reconnection starts by offering what was missing. Permission to feel without consequence. Attention without urgency. Presence without demand. You don't force vulnerability here. You build trust. The disconnected part of you is not the enemy. It is the guardian. Shadow work invites you to say, "Thank you for protecting me." You don't have to disappear. You don't have to run the whole system anymore. Integration doesn't exile coping strategies. It updates them. Softness doesn't mean collapsing. It means experimenting with small risks. Saying one true sentence. Letting someone see mild disappointment. Staying present during emotional discomfort. Safety grows through experience, not insight. Receiving is often harder than giving. Letting someone show up without earning it can feel destabilizing. But healing asks a new question. What happens if I don't preemptively disconnect? Not forever. Just for a moment longer than usual. The philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote about living the questions rather than forcing answers. Emotional reconnection is one of those questions. You don't solve it. You stay with it. You let yourself be changed slowly. Affirmation. You are not distant because you are broken. You are distant because you adapted. An adaptation can soften. You are not here to be fixed. You are here to become whole. If this journey resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in the quiet coping, the emotional restraint, the self-sufficiency that costs more than it shows, you're not alone in it. This space exists for people who learn to survive by disconnecting, and are now learning how to live without abandoning themselves. If you feel safe, share a piece of your story in the comments. If these words mattered to you, gently support the space, like, subscribe, stay. Connection begins when we stop pretending we don't need it. You are not here to be fixed. You are here to become whole.